Okay, everyone, for today's lesson, we are going to talk about combining integers with the addition sign, which means we're going to be adding integers. But normally when we add something, the numbers are going to get larger. But we're going to know with integers, it's a little bit different when we combine integers. So we're actually not going to use the word adding so much, but when we look at combining, we're going to be thinking about it as putting together. So when we put something together, we're going to use whenever we see the adding sign, we're going to use word and. So for example, we're going to put 2 and 3 together. Instead of 2 plus 3, we're going to write during our integers unit, when we have positives and negatives, we are going to write it as, or think of it as 2 and 3. Okay, so that's what we're doing today. Some background of some things that we need to know is something called a zero pair. So when we have a zero pair, what that means is we have one positive and we have one negative. But we are going to, when we match them together, so when we match a positive and a negative together, that's going to give us what we call a zero pair. So if we have a positive 1 and a negative 1, and then we match them together, that will give us our 0. Okay, now something else we need to talk about for today is our integers counter. Okay, now you can put the squiggly line through your papers if you like to separate it, that's fine. But I'm just going to focus on the notes. So first we're talking about our putting together, combining. Then we're looking at our zero pairs. And just some background, we need to talk about our integer counters. Now from elementary school, we use the integer counters, and if it's on a paper or a graph paper, if we have an open circle is going to be a positive 1. That's going to represent one positive. And the little chips, the integer chips, it may also be yellow. So if you have an open circle unshaded, that's a positive 1 or a yellow chip, integer chip. And then if you have a negative, it's going to be a shaded circle, and that will represent a negative or a negative 1. And on the flip side of the integer chip, if you have a yellow, on the opposite side, the negative would be the red integer chip. So I wanted to talk about the integer counters. So when we take a look at modeling the zero pair, so if we have one positive and one negative, it's going to be shaded. A positive and a negative, unshaded and shaded, if we match them, the positive and the negative will cancel each other out, and it will give you 0. And for example, if you had 2 positives and you had 2 negatives, which would be shaded, if you match them up as well, a positive and a positive negative, that would also give you 0. So this is 1 0 pair matched up. This is 2 0 pairs matched up. So let's take a look at a few examples down below of combining integers. So if we look at -4 and +3, we have 4 negatives and 3 positives. So if we take the 4 negatives, starting with that, 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives and 3 positives, 1, 2, 3. So modeling them out with the integer tips, 4 negatives and 3 positives, once we match them up or we pair them, what we notice is 1 and 1 together would cancel each other, 1 and 1 together, 1 and 1 together. So then you have 1 left over that is not a pair, and because it is a shaded one, we have more negatives than positives. Then -4 plus +3, or -4 and 3 together, would give us a result of 1 negative left over. So this is left over after we make the 0 pairs. For the 0 pairs, okay? Let's look at another example. So we have 5 plus -2, but we're not going to say that we're adding, we're going to be looking at it as a combining problem. So we have 5 positives and 2 negatives. So starting with 5 positives, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have 2 negatives. 1, 2, and then let's shade them in. And let's match them up. So negative, positive, there's one match or one pair. Negative and a positive, there's another one. And there's no other pairs left over, so now we have 1, 2, 3. So for this combining problem, we had 5 plus -2, or 5 and -2, and this is going to be our result, which is we have more positives than we have negatives, so after we combine, our answer would be +3. So looking at our next example, so we have -1 and -6. We put them together, we put them together, -1, let's start with that. 1 negative, and then we have 6 negatives after that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to shade them in because they're all negative. So now we shade them in. Now be careful. I know some students are going to want to go ahead and pair them up, but the 0 pairs are only when you have a positive and a negative, when you have an opposite pair. And if you look down below, the 0 pair, we do not have opposite pairs. We have same pairs. So we have a negative and negative. So there is no canceling and there's no deleting in this process. So if you have negatives, 1 negative and 6 negatives, well, all together, -1 plus -6. All together, you have 7 negatives. There are no opposite pairs to do any canceling or do any deleting. So we're just going to identify what we have, which is 7 7 negatives. And let's go back to elementary for just one moment, and we're going to tie this together. Is the same idea is before we have positives and positives. So if you add all the positives, 1, 2, we have 2 positives, and 3 positives, 1, 2, 3. And notice they're all positives. If we come up here, we had opposite pairs, and when we use opposite pairs, they cancel each other. Opposite pairs or 0 pairs, but down below, there's no opposites. They're all the same thing. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all together. How many total positives do we have? 2 plus 3 is 5, or positive 5. So let's put a note in here. There are no opposite pairs here. Here we had a negative and a positive that deleted each other. They were opposites, so they canceled. Down here, there's no opposites. And then also in this problem, there were also no opposite pairs, or otherwise known as 0 pairs. When you put opposites together, you will get a 0.